Yeah, welcome Vikashi and Birbhaduji to our second edition of StreamSide Chats. Um, Nepal is where the sector has its roots in the Southeast Asia region, and both of you have been at the initial phase of that development. So we're very fortunate to have you here. You are able to give us a hindsight perspective of the last 30, 40 years. So I wanted to just start off with what have been your thoughts on the overall development of the sector?
Yeah, thank you, Dipti. So the micro hydro sector in Nepal, I think, starts maybe around the mid 70s when locally manufactured small turbines uh, uh, started being developed first by international aid organizations. The Swiss Agency for Technical Assistance at that time started developing some turbines, small scale, locally manufactured propeller turbines, crossflow turbines, and that was out of Balaju in Kathmandu. And then in West Nepal, in Bhutwal, the development consulting services Bhutwal um, um, uh, program of the United Mission to Nepal also started doing some work with small scale crossflow turbines. In the meantime, there had been local entrepreneurs like Akkalman Nakarmi and others who had been making um, improvements to the traditional watermill. So it really started from three different directions. Um, and the key was small scale turbines, typically 5 to 15 kilowatts, and largely to replace diesel mills, which at this time were finding their way into the hills of Nepal. And with all the challenges of carrying diesel, and the diesel engines themselves are heavy, transporting diesel fuel during the rainy seasons was difficult. And so these programs really started to were started to use the plentiful streams and the water power that was available, and um, improve the efficiency of existing water mills, of which there were tens of thousands, but limited mainly to grinding wheat and corn. But to basically take the turbine mill with its higher efficiency and use that to both hull rice, press oil from oilseed, and also to for grinding. So that was really the program. Um, I mean, by the time I started work in the sector in 1985, uh, there was already over 1,000 of these mills throughout Nepal, and really the start was from productive uses. Till that time, till 1984 in Nepal, um, electricity was still the monopoly of the utility, so communities were not allowed to generate power. And in 1984, the government essentially delicensed sort of power generation units up to 100 kilowatts and allowed for these entrepreneurs who were running mills till that point to basically add a generator and supply electricity in the evening. So milling all day and generating electricity for lighting in the evening. Um, and you know, between 1985 and 1990, well, 1995, a whole range of larger micro hydro systems that became pretty much primarily electricity generation units, and then powering productive uses with that electricity rather than what it used to be, which was primarily agri-processing units with electricity as one of the uses. So that shift happened. And Birbadaji, who we have with us today, was one of the pioneers of that second transition. At this point, the government also started providing roughly 50% subsidy on the electrical components, mainly because they realized that while the milling was profitable, the electricity generation part of it would have, if the entrepreneur had to spend the entire investment, for that the tariff would be significantly more expensive than in the cities. So the government basically had a policy at that time implemented through the Agricultural Development Bank that if you took a loan through them, then they would subsidize 50% of the additional electrical components. And Bidwaduji has some good stories about the hoops he had to jump through to access that subsidy. It wasn't easy, but it was possible.
Yeah, that's fascinating that early on there had been a credit mechanism for these projects, and then it shifted to the subsidy approach.
It was the Agricultural Development Bank till all through the middle of the 90s. And it was intermittent. They were providing the subsidy when the Ministry of Finance gave them resources. But, they were primarily a bank, Agricultural Development Bank. And I think there was some pressure on them to not be in the promotion business of, energy technologies. The Agricultural Development Bank really was before its time. At that time, the chairperson and the MD there, Mr. Sri Krishna Upadhyaya, he really championed renewable energy and had established 5 appropriate technology centers throughout the country.
Wow.
And so they were much more than just a bank. They really championed these technologies. And I think both of us have met him, and he was really a champion early on, and worked with him at that time. But as pressure was applied to the Agricultural Development Bank to not be a promotion organization, that the credit aspect was really what they should be focusing on. It became clear that a separate agency was needed to focus, to really promote renewable energy. And so in 1995. Several of us were asked by the Planning Commission at that time to help with writing the first documents for establishing the Alternative Energy Promotion Center. Vishwabhushan Namatya, who myself, several others sort of did the early documentation to establish that center. And I think in 1997, finally, that center was established. And that's when we got funders in a big way, particularly the Danes came in and supported the AEPC at that time through their ESAP, Energy Sector Assistance Program. But the subsidy levels at that time, finally, the Danes did a pretty detailed analysis for the justification and came up with, what is still today the subsidy program, like the justification for that. So ESAP finally came in with led by the Danes, but they brought in other funders. And for the first time, I think starting in 98, Nepal had a real national program led by the Alternative Energy Promotion Center, and with a subsidy program that was continuous, and that also started out right from the beginning with a hydro, solar, and a biogas component, and improved cookstoves. So it became a comprehensive program, much more long term, and microhydro was a key technology within that.
That's a really insightful perspective, that the program started with a local ecosystem of manufacturers and people who had innovated the mills into electricity, and then this holistic bank came on and then that led to a government and international donor program.
Yeah, that's correct. And the one of the things I think that comes up a lot during international discussions is, where did Nepal's rich manufacturing sector come from? And the essentially, folks like Akkalman Nakarmi, who was already active in that sector and had a workshop making improvements to. He made water wheels at that time. Improved the traditional mill with a metal runner instead of the wooden runner that traditional Himalayan water mills typically have. And then a lot of people were offshoots, new entrepreneurs that came out of the Balaju program um, and the Bhutwal program. The engineers and technicians who were the first employees of those programs, supported by the Swiss SATA and the UMN program. It is those people who really then came out as entrepreneurs. So Shamraz Pradhan from Balaju is one of the notable folks who came out of the Balaju program and became one of the well-known equipment manufacturers, turbine manufacturers. From Bhutwal, we had Kappa Engineering and several others. So really, two pockets developed: one around the Balaju initiative and one around the Bhutwal initiative. And Birwadurji at that time was a customer to these people. He was an entrepreneur, and we will talk more about him.
Mm-hmm.
But he, at that time, was contracted these companies to build the micro hydro in his village. And it was later that he himself got into the equipment supply and construction side of things to help other communities. But initially, the reason Nepal has this deep experience of ecosystem of equipment suppliers is that that investment was made starting in the mid 1970s
Mm-hmm.
by development organizations, and then that real boost that was given by the Agricultural Development Bank that actively financed these systems. I mean, if I had to go back to the two main reasons Nepal had one of the most dynamic microhydro programs around the world, it was those two elements.
Yeah. Yeah, and then when international funding comes, the ecosystem is there already, and scale up, I imagine, happened very quickly.
Yeah,
So the investment made into developing the ecosystem seems very worthwhile.
it was, and it, as you say, it was easy for international development organizations to come in. So my first program, I started in Bhutwal, and we were funded by, at that time, the Intermediate Technology Development Group out of the UK. And for example, they introduced the controllers, the electronic load controllers at that time, both the Jerry Pope electrical load controller, the electronic load controller, and the induction generator controller. So, and these were, you know, GIFIT funded programs at that time came in, and ITDG, who I then went on to work for after I moved to Kathmandu in 1989. Worked then directly with the Agricultural Development Bank to try and expand some of these larger programs. And Bir Bahadurji got his loan from the Agricultural Development Bank at that time, and encouragement from Mr. Upadhyay. So, the early folks who were involved in these sectors, Mr. Kiran Man Singh, who was at that time at the Agricultural Development Bank, later on went to lead the renewable energy development program of UNDP. So, I think those were the three real hubs here. Balaju, Bhutwal, and the Agricultural Development Bank really led to a lot of the leadership of the microhydro program over the years.
Yeah. Shifting more now from how the manufacturing, how the projects develop, to the impact of the project. So this is what we will learn more about from Birbadurji. But having a local ecosystem involved also means I would imagine that the take-up of the various different productive end uses of electricity. So yeah, with that, we can transition into more about Birbadurji's approach.